Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Mei Lin, and welcome to this AOGME webinar on careers in academic medicine from the perspective of comm leadership. We are pleased to have you join us in this webinar featuring Dr. Anya Cope, Dr. Brittany Javed, and myself as we share insights on our pathways to a career in medicine and for a career in academic medicine at our colleges of osteopathic medicine. Today's talk is titled Academic Careers in IM, FMM, and PEDS. Before we get started, I would like to review a few housekeeping notes. This webinar is being recorded. The recording will be posted on the AOGME webpage within a week. All webinar participants are in listen-only mode. If you experience technical issues during the webinar, please use the chat feature and we will assist you. If you have any questions for us during the webinar, please feel free to submit them through the question and answer feature at any time. Thank you for joining us again. Today, my name is Mei Lin, and I'm the Assistant Dean of Graduate Medical Education at Touro University, California. I am family medicine trained, and I have an interest in health policy as well as healthcare technology. I'm going to let Dr. Brittany Javed introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. My name is Dr. Brittany Javed. I am a pediatrician. Prior to my transition to full-time academic medicine, I did my residency training in pediatrics in Detroit, Michigan, and then worked as a pediatric hospitalist for 3 years in Sacramento, California, before becoming a full-time academic physician. Currently in my role, I serve a couple of different things. I am the admissions chair for our school, A.T. Still University School of Osteopathic Medicine in Arizona. I serve as the pediatric clerkship director, and I also work as clinical faculty. And I'll go ahead and let Dr. Anya Cope introduce herself right now.
Good evening. My name is Anya Cope. I'm the Associate Dean of Clinical Affairs at Lincoln Memorial University, DeBusk College of Osteopathic Medicine. I am trained in internal medicine. I trained at a very small community hospital in Norton, Virginia, very close to the rural town that I grew up in. I'm first generation college student, so I never really anticipated seeing myself in this position. So I'm very happy to answer questions about what does that look like when you kind of grew up in a smaller area with no really guidance on how to get into academics and academic medicine. So Dr. Lin.
All right, well, for CME purposes, we're going to flash our conflict of interest disclosure slide. And I just wanted to introduce how this topic came up. The three of us kind of met and found ourselves in academic medicine at different stages. And we decided that, there is just so many ways of getting into academic medicine. Everyone's journey takes its own path. And we all love food. We discovered that we all like to go out to eat and try new foods. And so we decided to make it a little bit of a food analogy in our description and introduction of our origin stories, as well as our own paths to academic medicine today. So, sometimes you like to just make chicken soup. And I have my own recipe for chicken soup. I like to put noodles in them because that's how my kids like to eat them. But I'm sure that some people like to have rice in their chicken soup. Some people like to have it plain. Some people like to use bone broth. There are just a lot of different ways to make the same dish. Food is something that's really universal and everybody needs to eat. And so today we wanted to have a panel discussion to just discover, how we came to our own paths within academic medicine. We'll be glad to take any questions along the way, so feel free to type them into the chat, and we will do our best to weave them into the discussion. We've also received some audience questions ahead of this program, and we also will try our best to address some of those as we speak. At the end of toward the end of the webinar today, we'll have about 10 to 15 minutes to have some additional questions or cover any questions that remain. So let's go ahead and get started. The structure of our panel today is really, we're going to be introducing our own paths and share our origin stories into academic medicine. We're going to look at, what components we all kind of discovered along the way as part of our recipe for success. And a lot of the questions that we got from the audience ahead of time really asked for advice. And so we will be happy to share some of our pitfalls and some of our perfections. And I have that in quotes because nothing really is perfect. And there is no perfect recipe to get into academic medicine. So what we'll do is I'll go ahead and let Dr. Javed share her origin story first.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Lynn. Again, very excited to be speaking with everyone tonight. And please do not hesitate to put your questions in the chat box. To start out with my origin story, like Dr. Cope, I'm also a first-generation college student. So the journey through undergraduate college and undergraduate medical education was one that was a little nerve-wracking. I never envisioned myself as someone that would be working in full-time academic medicine. Although looking back, I can see along the way, I was very interested in teaching. To go back, actually, in my 4th year of medical school, my school offered a teaching elective in your 4th year, and that was something that I did just because I thought it was interesting. And I was able to help facilitate small groups of my peers, able to spend some time in the simulation lab. And I kind of took that experience. I enjoyed it, but I didn't really think about it while I was in residency. And after residency, you know, I was working as a hospitalist, and I was lucky enough to have medical students and residents on my service with me. You know, I loved being a hospitalist, but it was during the time of COVID. And unfortunately, after COVID broke out, both my medical students and my residents were kicked off of service just to conserve PPE. And a couple of things happened simultaneously. One is while I was rounding without any learners on my service, I kind of realized I wasn't having as much fun. That's not to say medicine isn't fun, not to say you can't have fun on the wards, but my experience really changed once my learners weren't on anymore. And I kind of had that feeling like, maybe my passion, you know, really lies in teaching. And at the very same time, I was doing a leadership program. It's called the Young Physicians Leadership Alliance. This was through the American Academy of Pediatrics, and I had a mentor. And I remember telling her, you know, I enjoy medicine, but I feel like I want to do something else as well. You know, I don't know if this looks like staying in hospital leadership or if I want to do something else with medical students. And we talked through some different options, and she said, you know, Dr. Javed, I just want to stop you. I know I'm supposed to coach you. I'm not supposed to mentor you, but I wanted to let you know that your voice lit up when you spoke about medical education. So I had those two instances at that same time that really pushed me into thinking a little bit more about what I wanted my job and my path to look like. And from that point, I started to look at different medical schools and to look for different things. And so I, at that point, was fortunate enough to be able to start my search and found a position with A.T. Still University School of Osteopathic Medicine. And it was a leap applying. I had a lot of imposter syndrome. Yes, I had been in attending for a couple of years, but you know, I wasn't a professor at a medical school. I had not been one. And here I was going to be a full-time professor, you know, assistant professor at that point. So it was a little nerve-wracking making that transition, but I'm very, very glad that I did. So really at the end of the day, it was a leap of faith, deciding to make a career transition. That being said, I still do see patients on the side. I do moonlighting. So I have that, a little bit of that balance, but I am in full-time academia at this point. And I will say it's the best decision I could ever make for myself. So I joined the academic medicine ranks a little bit earlier in my career. I know when I was initially applying for jobs, you know, I had some people at different medical schools that I interviewed at actually tried to deter me for making this leap. They said, well, you're too young, you know, you're too young by age and by experience. You should really just focus just on clinical medicine and seeing patients. You know, you shouldn't be at the point where you're considering doing academic medicine. That's for more people that are retired. But thankfully, I kind of disregarded that advice and decided maybe that's an institution I don't want to work at. And I was lucky that I found an institution that really saw me and saw my experiences for what they were, and were very welcoming to me. And so I've been at that point where I've been able to progress in my career within academic medicine, and I'm very, very grateful for it. That's my origin story. I know we can get into some more details in a little bit, but Dr. Lynn, would you mind giving us your origin story?
Absolutely. I just wanted to comment, Dr. Javed, was not aware that you were being deterred from academic medicine. And I want to say how much I see you really connecting with students because you sort of are a little bit maybe younger than the traditional professor. And I think that that's a huge asset and a huge part of what you bring to academic medicine. I always see you as one of my technology consultants. And I think it is a lot of the technology that you learn because you can connect so naturally with the generation of students that are learners right now. Hi,
Thank you.
everybody. For those who joined a little bit later, my name is Dr. Mei Lin. I'm the Assistant Dean of Graduate Medical Education at Touro University in California. And right now we're all sharing origin stories. So I just wanted to, share a little bit with you guys about my journey. So I attended medical school at Touro University, where I am now lucky enough to serve the students and the faculty there. And went over to residency in family medicine in Philadelphia. And when I was in residency, I had the opportunity to just explore different interests. And I discovered like that I had, I did what's called, back then it was called the TIPS Fellowship or Training and Policy Studies Fellowship. And my program, I had just such an excellent program with excellent mentors who encouraged me to kind of learn a little bit about interest in health policy. And so through that program, I was able to, at a time when clinical training was so intense, have some space to think about other interests that I had. And I discovered that, maybe I had a little bit of like administrative / academic sort of like part of me. And I think prior to wanting to become a physician, I actually wanted to be a teacher. And so that always kind of stuck with me, like ever since I was in kindergarten. And so I kind of always knew that I liked teaching, and I always thought that I would teach through my practice of medicine, which I always do. It's such a huge component of being a family medicine physician. But I didn't know if I would take it to like full-time practice. Toward the end of residency, I had the opportunity to join faculty. And back then it was called the primary care department at Touro University, California. And I was able to like just flex my muscles in terms of teaching. And I think at that point in my career, I just knew that I loved interacting with students and I loved teaching. And I think I got a lot of positive feedback about strengths, and also a lot of constructive feedback about things that I could work on. And so I spent some time kind of refining some of my teaching strategies. But at some point, I kind of felt like because I went into academic medicine straight out of residency, I really needed to hone some of my clinical skills. And so I felt like I needed to sort of amplify opportunities for clinical growth. And I decided to take a step back to do a little bit more part-time teaching and to do a little bit more full-time clinical care. I ended up joining an outpatient primary care practice. I live in the Bay Area, and so tech is all around me. And this is a practice that really was a hybrid, kind of like a technology company startup. Doctor's office had a baby is kind of how I described the practice. It was a very tech-forward company to practice outpatient primary care. And I specifically chose this practice because I had a huge interest in osteopathic manipulation. And it was a practice that seemed in its DNA is what they called, but essentially in this practice's culture, they were really supportive of integrating OMT into primary care in a way that I didn't see other practices do in some of the other areas that I was looking to practice medicine. And so I immediately gravitated toward this organization, and I still see patients through this organization, but I just have a little bit of a larger academic hat and a smaller clinical hat. So I kind of went a little bit back and forth. I spent about 10 years, almost 10 years, practicing mainly outpatient primary care in an urban setting, and had opportunity to grow in leadership skills. So I became an office medical director and kind of moved around in this particular setting in different districts to sort of lead clinical teams in different settings, urban, suburban, and then eventually nationally, I was one of the facilitators for a sort of internal program within this organization to grow clinical leaders. And I think at that point, it rekindled my love for teaching. And I remembered how much I missed being with students and the interactions there. And so then I came back more full-time into academic medicine in the administrative role as the assistant dean of GME. So that's kind of my journey into academic medicine. I'll say we will have more opportunity in this talk as we answer some of the questions to share more specific stories, but I'll let Dr. Cope share her origin story.
Thank you. So I think one of the important things to realize when you're looking at academic medicine is realizing that there's multiple components to it. So there's graduate medical education, then there's undergraduate medical education, and you have to really find that balance as to what works for you and your personality. Anyone who knows me knows that I like to have control of things. I like to be in control of outcomes. When I finished residency at this small internal medicine residency program, it's a great program. It really prepares you. One of our questions was, what are some things you look for in a residency program that you wish you knew now? I wish more students understood the value of smaller community programs because they really prepare you on how to take care of patients. They really prepare you for fellowship. So you don't have to train at a large allopathic institution in order to be a great physician and then to be prepared for academic medicine. I trained at this program and it was really great at preparing me. And I ended up starting a hospitalist program at this hospital and being a core faculty member for the residency. Which meant I supervised residents in the graduate medical education realm. That was not for me because residents could write orders on my patients and I wanted to oversee every small detail that they did. And I can tell you that the realm of GME for me was not where I was happy. I was too stressed every moment of the day, wondering what resident would mess up and I wouldn't catch it. So if you are a person who likes to have control of every single detail, being in the GME realm of academia may not be for you. It certainly was not for me. After I left that program, I ended up going and doing other hospitalist nocturnist jobs, and then ended up here at LMU DCOM because I had comfort in knowing that students could not write orders and I didn't have to follow those orders. So I was still teaching, I was still in medicine, I was still seeing patients at the time, but I had much more comfort in knowing that I didn't have to follow every single detail that the students were doing, but still had that ability to teach them in the clinical environment. So it is very important that you know yourself, know your personality, know the things that you can control and can't control, and what amount of autonomy can you give your learners, and be comfortable with that. Because I was not comfortable in the GME environment, but I'm very comfortable in the undergraduate GME environment. And you have to understand, do I like to do research? Do I not like to do research? That's another question. Is research required in the academic environment? Yes and no. I do not personally do research. There are a lot of academic medicine jobs in maybe larger allopathic institutions that do want you to do some of your full-time equivalent time in doing research. So again, it's about knowing yourself. What do you expect and want out of your position, and what are you comfortable with, and is that place correct for you? So that's a little bit about me and my journey here, and how I used what my comfort level was to dictate where I practiced in the academic medicine world.
So I'm kind of putting myself in the shoes of maybe a medical student or a resident who's contemplating academic medicine. And in these origin stories, I kind of heard that at some point, we all kind of knew that we loved teaching. And I think if you're thinking about academic medicine, you kind of have this passion for teaching because that's what you're doing. You're immersing yourself in medical education. And as Dr. Cope described, there are different levels and different environments in which academic medicine it exists. And so finding out number one, that you are a teacher at heart, in addition to a physician, is I think something that is pretty universal among those who go into academic medicine. And I think once you kind of know that about yourself, then it's good to consider what environment within what academic medicine might be a good fit. And so we talked about undergraduate medical education, UME, and that is at the, before you go into residency period. So some of us work in the clinic with clinical education heavily. Some of us teach the first and second year students heavily. And some of us are a little bit more involved in the graduate or GME medical education realm of medical education. But even within those spaces, some of us are a little bit more teachers. Some of us are more organizationally oriented, and we are kind of more comfortable wearing the hat of an administrator. And there are those of us who kind of find ourselves a little bit more of a researcher. And so I think the first thing I would do if I were in your shoes is think about, do I love to teach? And if I love to teach, what type of environment can I see myself thriving in? And kind of make some choices about intentionally trying out those hats. And sometimes you try on a hat and you're kind of like, ooh, that's like not really for me. And sometimes you're like, oh, I actually didn't know that I would like this so much. And let me kind of explore it a little bit further. Dr. Javed, I wonder if you could comment a little bit about other sort of more non-traditional paths to academic medicine. And we had some pre-discussions about even being a content creator, which is maybe not something that people traditionally think about, but can very much encompass an aspect of academic medicine that may be available to people who are contemplating.
Yeah, to jump off of that, I think people think of academic medicine and they immediately think, well, I have to work at a medical school or I just have to teach for a residency program. When in actuality, academic medicine or the art of teaching in varied environments can encompass a lot of different things. So one of the things that we had thought about before we got into this call was, there are places like medical education companies. I think most of you know some of the big players that you use to study within medical education. Well, a lot of those companies actually need physician advisors to help them develop the content, to help teach the content. So that's another realm that's outside of just your traditional teaching that uses physicians in the education space. There are things like content creation. Be careful out there. The social media is a big world and there's a lot of misinformation out there. But there are certain people who really take that for their own and use that as a platform to help teach students through that as well. In addition, there are coaching companies. A lot of pre-medical students always want advice on, how to get into medical school or, what way should I study? So I wanted to remind everyone that you can actually broaden your scope outside of just, the traditional teaching formats, which are a lot of fun. I love teaching in different modalities, live in person, but I wanted to remind everyone that, you don't have to limit yourself in your definition to what teaching in academic medicine might mean. So thank you, Dr. Lynn.
Absolutely. I kind of wanted to bring this group to kind of thinking about personalities, right? So some of us in discovering what are our interests and kind of figuring out our identity within medicine and in particular, potentially academic medicine. I look at our group and I see that some of us are introverts and some of us are extroverts. And there are different teaching environments. Dr. Javed, you teach a lot of small sort of problem-based learning groups. Some of us like to lecture in big lecture halls. So Dr. Cook, can you just kind of walk us through, personality and how different personalities may navigate different teaching environments?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think it's really important that you kind of understand yourself, and that's hard because your environment is consistently changing while you're going through medical school and then residency, and you may never know yourself because it's really difficult. But I think that one, being open to new possibilities, kind of like you said once before, Dr. Lynn, just being open to trying new things is really important. Being able to lecture and maybe trying that a different way is really important. I think that not just saying no to things, and maybe instead of saying no, or maybe having that opportunity to saying, okay, I have to do a cardio lecture, but how can I do it in my style is really important. Or can I maybe not do it lecture, but do a skills lab is really important. But I think personality wise, I have preceptors every day who say that you know, I don't want to come lecture, but could we do a skills lab? I'm happy to do that. And that can be your first step in the door. It's really important to kind of understand what you are good at and what you enjoy, but it's also important to kind of step outside of your comfort zone and try something different, because you may not know that you like going back to the food reference. You know, I didn't know I liked sushi until I tried it. So you need to try new things in order to understand what you may enjoy in the realm of medicine in general. Just like you need to experience all of your rotations to pick a specialty, it is the same with academic medicine in general.
That's great. So what I'm hearing is like, it's so important to know yourself and to know, you know, what environment may be a good fit. And maybe it's good to kind of try different flavors or different spices sometimes to understand which one suits your palate. Now, a couple of questions that, you know, the audience had for us ahead of this is just, I'm just going to throw some of them out there, is like, what do you love most about the position that you have now? Dr. Javed, you want to take that one?
Sure, I'll go ahead and start first. I think in terms of what I love is, I think my favorite thing is to see how my medical students progress. I know it's, you know, when you first start medical school, everyone for the most part is terrified. How, you know, I'm with all of these other students that are so smart. I don't know anything. How am I going to study? How am I going to make it past, you know, my initial level one? And to watch, to really sit with them and help advise them, and to watch their progress as they become people that didn't think of themselves as future doctors, to actually see them take that mantle of responsibility and to really learn the skills that it takes to be a successful physician is so much fun. And you know, my favorite day of the year is commencement day, to really watch those students walk across the stage. And I am used to not be an emotional person prior to, I don't know, maybe having a child or being in academic medicine. But even when I first started the job and I didn't know the fourth years that they're graduating, I actually teared up because I know how hard they have worked to get to this point. So I think really developing the relationship with the students and watching that progress is just so much fun for me.
I wanted to highlight a live question that is being typed into the chat here. I'm going to ask it in parts because it's a question that has got different components to it. So what is your view about being an entrepreneur contributing healthcare while still working in an academic setting as a DO physician? And the context here is that, you know, this attendee has seen more MDs work in that way, being an entrepreneur and still working academic medicine, but I seldom see DOs do that. And this person is wondering, you know, I'm not really certain whether it's a culture specific phenomenon or there are just fewer DOs who have chosen to take this route. How open-minded do you think the DO community looks at this? And I think when they say this, it's probably the being an entrepreneur whilst being in academic medicine. Any thoughts on that?
Dr. Lynn, I would actually throw that back to you, because I think out of the three of us, when I think entrepreneur, I think of you. But I will say, I think you can be as entrepreneurial as your personality would like you to be. There are no limits there, even in academic medicine. But I'd really want to throw this to Dr. Lynn, because I think
Okay.
you're
I'm
going
happy
to
to take
the
this
answer.
question. I love this question. You know me well. So I actually think that we probably see more examples of our allopathic friends going into sort of being entrepreneurs because there are just more allopathic friends who are in large university settings, large academic institutions. I think that the beautiful part of the beauty of academic medicine is the flexibility that it allows. So I always like to joke around with my students and say, like, I can do anything I want and call it research because you kind of, it is kind of that. You get curious about something and then you just kind of, you have to have the right components to make it happen. But research can turn into a passion for developing software that looks at, how you can use AI to look at the back of the retina, or how you can integrate some kind of passion to be able to develop a product. I think there are some nuances that when you're in academic medicine, you have to think about. So if you want to do a patent, or for a specific technology or idea, there are some considerations as to what your contract says about that. And you have to be, so if you know this ahead of time, you have to kind of put that out there before you sign a contract, because the idea that you produce, if it came out of being in that academic institution, may be a shared idea, and you have to just be aware of some of those legalities. But I would say that in academic medicine, in the DO world, I don't see that it's particularly limited in terms of being able to be an entrepreneur. I think a lot, when I think of my immediate circle of colleagues, many of them are entrepreneurs. They're small business owners who've opened up OMM practices, and they pair that with academic medicine because they love to teach, but they also love to see patients. I think if I could make like a broad statement, is perhaps a lot of our DO colleagues are more clinically oriented. So I just see, and I don't know if this is true everywhere, and I don't know if this is necessarily going to be true of the future, but I guess to answer this question, I don't see limitations. I don't think that just because I'm a DO, I'm limited in being I am limited in my entrepreneurial aspirations at all. I just don't see that. So I think hopefully that helps to answer the question that our attendee asked. There are more questions coming through, so this is so fun. How do you balance, so this is the second question that's live. How do you balance clinical duties, teaching responsibilities, and research in academic medicine? How does being treated at an academic medical center differ from other healthcare settings? I am also.
Yeah, I can.
Yeah.
Oh, I was going to say I can start, and Dr. Cope and Dr. Lynn, if you want to chime in, at least feel free. So typically, when you have a contract for an academic position, it's delineated in your contract. What percentage of your week or your month will be devoted to clinical time. What percentage of your full-time equivalent will be for research, what will be for clinic, and what will be for academic duties. And so that is very regimented depending on your contract. And I can actually kind of, because I know one of our other questions, what does a day in the life or what does a week in the life look like for an academic physician? I will say many of the osteopathic medical schools, there are opportunities to just solely be an academic physician. You do not have to do clinical if you do not want to. Whereas big allopathic medical centers, a lot of your FTE or that full-time equivalent will involve more clinical duty. So as a student or a resident, you just have to think about, okay, what do I want my week or my life to look like? So for example, a week in the life of myself, balancing all of these different things is for me, when I am a small group facilitator or I'm teaching, it's usually 6 hours a week on average that we're doing teaching specifically. So for me, that's Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And when you're in academic medicine, you're typically on committees. So again, I run the admissions committee and I help run the admissions process for the medical school. So in the afternoons, where I might teach in the mornings, in the afternoons, it's quite a bit of committee work. So a lot of meetings in academic medicine. So if you cannot get yourself to sit still on Zoom, you might have a harder time. I know for me, being a hospitalist, it's someone used to running around, physically running around the hospital all of the time, to actually sitting still was very weird. So it was a very weird transition. But to get back to what the week looks like, a lot of committee work in the afternoons. I might have half a day a week. I do research, I do medical education research just a little bit. So some time to either work with a statistician or work with my team on some of these things that we might find interesting in terms of research. Definitely not hard research or clinical research on my end. It's mainly medical education research. And then within my contract, I have about half a day a week that I could spend doing clinical duties. So for me, I'm currently moonlighting in the pediatric urgent care. I do have family medicine residents come with me on that rotation. So I do some teaching during the mornings with the medical students, and then on occasion in the evenings with the residents. And I personally like that diversity. I will say every day is a little bit different. I like that. I like not having that uniformity of schedule and having some variety. So that's kind of what the week looks like. I don't know if Dr. Cope, Dr. Lynn, if you wanted to add in or answer that second part of that question.
Sure, I think my day looks a little bit different, as a majority of my time at this point is administrative, where I'm the Associate Dean of Clinical Affairs. A lot of my day is spent networking and trying to recruit clinical sites and preceptors. My week, there's very few white spaces in my calendar, which are not blocked for meetings. So I'm either traveling or I am on Zooms. So I think our days vary greatly depending on kind of where you are in that realm of your career and what you are doing that week. But I get to travel a lot, which is great for me. My husband does not enjoy it at the moment with our two kids. But it's fun because you do get to travel and you get to meet new people. So if that is exciting for you, that is really fun to get to do, because I do love to travel. They do get to go with me sometimes, but it's a fun part of it. And I'm sure Dr. Lynn, you probably get to do some of that too with your GME role.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of my responsibilities when it comes to clinical duties, teaching, and research are this is the way that I balance it. I guess this is how I'm going to answer it, is like I have a day a week where I see patients, and I see, I guess Dr. Javed said she'd like to run around. Well, I decided that I did not like to run around. And when everybody got accustomed to Zoom, I was very happy to do a lot of Zoom-based meetings and also to see patients virtually. So right now, my clinical practice is 100% virtual, although that is something that, I luckily and am very fortunate to have some flexibility. So I think there are moments when I'm seeing patients virtually that I kind of miss that in-person care. And so I could say, okay, for the next other 3 months, as my schedule gets published, I'm going to actually go into the office and see patients. And I am lucky to be in a setting where I have that level of flexibility. And so those 1 day a week is dedicated to clinical duties, teaching responsibilities. So in my role as Assistant Dean of Graduate Medical Education, a lot of the teaching is for faculty development of our external partners. And so some of that will involve travel and some of that is done virtually. And it's nice to have a blend. So I interface and network a lot, very similarly to Dr. Cope, with external partners and trying to build pathways and open doors for our students within graduate medical education. And actually, I do find myself when I'm interfacing a little too much with external partners that I really miss interacting with students. And so I will have a consistent sort of group of students that I like to take under my wing and to mentor. And then that kind of leads to research, because then I get a sense of what they may be interested in then. And some of the students really love research. And so I really try to integrate students into my research interests where there is compatibility so that I can balance those things in a way that feels right for me. And honestly, I've been very fortunate because it seems like a balance that works well also as a working mom, which is also a challenge. And I wanted to jump into that because there are some questions about that that were asked in terms of balancing, a very similar question, how do you balance clinical work with teaching research? But this one adds in family life. So I want to jump a little bit into that. And this question the person who asked this question is kind of put in parentheses, how do you avoid overcommitting? How do you avoid burnout? So I'm just going to tie those two questions together and transition to that.
So you build a good team around you, and then you also get a coach. That's what I've had to do lately. I got a coach to help me through some of the things, because when you overcommit, there are reasons that you are doing that. It's whether to prove something to yourself or someone else. So I've had to work on that. And I have recently made the commitment that I'm not taking work stuff home. So my computer stays here now instead of home. I think COVID was amazing, that it opened up technology possibilities, but it also tried to teach us that you have to be on all the time, and you don't. There are times that you have to put things away. And we owe it to ourselves and to others to not always be on. And so you can't overcommit yourself, because you can't pour from an empty cup. And so it's really important to place boundaries, and other people can cross your boundaries, but what a boundary is the way you respond, right? And so it's really important to work on those things, either through a coach or through a peer group, but you build a great team that supports you so that you can delegate, and you can do things effectively. But I have just learned that here recently, so I don't expect you to know that or do that right now. But you have to have proper time management and all those things in order to do that and get all the things done that you need to do.
And I'm so glad that you mentioned that, Dr. Cope, because don't we all wish that we heard that a little bit sooner in our careers, is build that great team. And I just want to add in the lens that, that great team not only is an absolute like gem and necessary professionally, but also personally. And so I think there are a lot of responsibilities, whether you're a female or male or in between, that you are a human being and that you need support at home when you are taking on such large professional responsibilities. And so I think as I have children, so as my kids have gone into different ages, I have found different support networks to help with the things to have that balance and to avoid the burnout. Dr.
I
Javed?
think it's very easy to overcommit. I remember when I first started within academic medicine, I went to my chair. I'm like, I'm not doing enough. I'm not doing enough things. I have too much free time. And he said, give it 3 months. And he was completely right, because within academic medicine, little projects, little things just start to pile up. And one good thing that you need to learn to practice to say, as Dr. Copen mentioned, is the word no. And so that is something that I've gotten used to saying a little bit more regularly and not feeling bad about it, because if you do overstretch yourself, you're not going to be as effective in the current roles that you're doing. And so I think that being able to set boundaries is very important. I think getting a mentor when you start within academic medicine, or getting someone to support you, is a way to keep yourself moving within the path of academic medicine, to just identify people that you might get along with and that might have your best interests at heart, whether in your institution or surrounding you within the medical education space. I think it's very important to look for mentorship. And that will be the thing that kind of keeps you afloat and keeps you moving along within this career trajectory. I do want to hit on a couple of questions that I'm seeing in the chat box. And one question struck me is, do you need, additional, certificates or a PhD or, a master's in healthcare administration to get started? And initially, before I started looking into academic medicine myself, I always told myself that's something that I absolutely needed to do if I was even going to think about academic medicine. And I kind of held myself back, I think, because I'm like, well, I need to do a fellowship in academic medicine, and that's the only way I'm going to get a job. Or maybe I'm not as good of a teacher, I have some imposter syndrome, as some of the other residents on the ward. There's no way anyone's going to take me. So to answer that question, no, you do not necessarily need a master's degree in education or theory to be able to get a job within an institution. That being said, if you want to go to a larger academic institution, be aware that a full-time professor position might not be available at first, and that's okay. I'd say get your feet wet by being an adjunct clinical instructor or working in a simulation once a week with the students. And that's how you really get your feet wet, really see what this academic medicine thing is all about, is sometimes by just doing it part-time in addition to some of your clinical duties. And then you can move on from there. That being said, I have a lot of my colleagues that do like to get masters in education or a PhD in education. And that's a lot of the times after the fact, after they've already gotten the job. And to answer the question, is it more difficult to return to academic medicine or going non-academic medicine? I think Dr. Lin, I think it sounds like you probably have the answer for that one, since you've kind of dabbled in and out throughout your journey.
Yeah. For those who joined a little bit later, in my own journey, I've kind of toned down academic medicine to kind of tone my clinical practice, spend a little bit more time in seeing patients. And then I've also gone the reverse direction, where I've kind of like said, I'm gonna cut down to more part-time clinical care and focus a little bit more on academic medicine. And I actually think that it has been an advantage for me to be able to see both worlds and to understand both worlds. I don't have a straight answer to this question, because I think I do not personally feel like I've been limited at all, jumping from clinical practice to academic medicine and then back, and being able to kind of dedicate more time depending on where my interests are in the season of career. I think that when you have in academic medicine, there are certain expectations, and it's institution dependent, right? Some institutions have tenure, and so you have to maintain a certain level of publications, or you have to have X, Y, and Z credentials. And I wonder if this question is kind of coming from that, is like, because when you're full-time clinical practice, you don't really have the bandwidth to be researching and pumping out publications. So is it harder to return to academic setting in that context? It really depends on the institution, and I think it depends on what part of academic medicine you're stepping into. So I just want to flip the question and just kind of give the perspective of, like, if I was going in wanting to do focus in clinical education, sort of the third and fourth years of a medical student's career. If I didn't have that clinical experience under my belt, I think it would be a little bit more challenging for me to be effective in that role. So I hope that kind of answers what the person who asked the question was looking for. There are different scenarios, and I think there's no one size fits all. And I think you can make it work according to where your interests are, what season of your career you're in. We have about 10 more minutes for questions, and so feel free to type additional questions into the chat. And while you do that, we're going to keep going down our list. We love that there were so many great questions that came through before the webinar started. Let's see here. Things to look for when deciding if the culture of a program is right for you. What things would you look for to determine whether or not the culture of a program is right for you?
And I can always throw out an answer. I know for me, it's very important for me as someone who, when I was initially doing the academic medicine searches, I wanted to work at an institution that focused on working with underserved patients and underserved populations. Through my training in Detroit, working with underserved populations was very important to me personally. So when I first started to look for jobs, I was looking for institutions that had a mission. You can look up the school's mission to work with underserved patients. And then when I was speaking with other institutions, I thought it was very important for me when I'm talking with the other faculty during interviews, when I'm talking to my potential chair boss, what does the work environment seem like? Do these people seem like they're getting along? Are they collegial? What kind of projects have they done together? And you really, as the person looking for that job, it's your due diligence to really try to understand the culture of that institution. Because the last thing that you want is to get in somewhere where, you know, a culture that's not productive, or where the people don't like each other, or where there's high turnover of the faculty. Um, you know, you really want to be in an institution where people will value your ideas and value each other as humans, you know. And I think I'm lucky in that fact that I work with people that value me as a human and want to get my opinions on things. But I wouldn't have been able to assess that if I didn't ask very strategic questions, you know, asking about what's the culture of your workplace, asking how they do feedback. So if they think I'm not doing a good job, how do they tell me that? What's the assessment like? So I think there are a lot of different ways where you can kind of decide if that fit is right for you. And the ways that I describe are just some of them.
Yeah, I wanted to just recognize the wisdom behind this question, because long time ago, somebody wisely told me that the people you work with is more important than the work that you do. And I have found that to be true in different environments. Now, the work that you do is also very important, but if you don't enjoy the people that you're working with, it's a little bit harder to accomplish that work, because most of what we do requires teams. And so I think it's really important to look at a institution's culture and see if it's a good fit for you. And Dr. Java gave some examples of, you know, how you might go about doing that. I think asking, you know, questions of the people who currently work there is really important. A lot of academic institutions have that adjunct clinical opportunity, and that gives you a way of, on a part-time basis or on a per diem basis, go and actually be there and see what it's like before you make a full-time commitment. So if you have the opportunity to do that, that is also something that I think is a good idea to get a sense of culture. Anything to add, Dr. Cope, to that?
I agree with the things that you all said. I think there's a quote that I think it was Maya Angelou had kind of said, and this is just a variation of that. When someone shows you who they are, believe them. And I think that's similar for your workplace. If you see things that are kind of off, that you're like, I just don't know, then believe that. If you see it happening with other coworkers or whatever, and just people in general in your life, when they show you who they are, believe them. They don't have to continue to have that behavior over and over and over. So when the culture just does not appear to be something that you can be comfortable with, then it's okay to look for a different position or to be somewhere else. So just remember that as you're going forward. When that continues to be an issue, it's okay to look for something else, but believe it when they show you.
Some good advice there. We have about 5 minutes left, so if you have questions, feel free to type it into the chat. We are receiving some, and I'm going to read it aloud. For those who want to devote their full time to academic medicine without clinical practice, is it still imperative that they pursue graduate medical training and be licensed, or is it possible to have an academic career with just the medical/osteopathic degree?
So if I'm not mistaken, the COCA, which is our accreditation body, asks us to provide license and board certification for our faculty. So I think it is imperative to have the training. Life happens, things change. Go to residency because you don't know what tomorrow holds.
I would agree with that. Yeah.
Best protect yourself and have the training because you spent a lot of money to get here. Do the residency program.
There is a lot of perspective that you gain in that residency program that you can hand over to your students when you teach. And I often have to pull from those clinical examples to make sort of even the first 2 years feel really relevant for students. So it's hard for me to see it another way, but another reason besides, sort of just like accreditation requirements that I would say is important to take into consideration is sometimes you might want to grow in academic medicine. And there are certain requirements, like if you wanted to be a chair of a department, right? Or if you wanted to be, you just never know. And so I think just tying this with another question, like I don't think it's hard to jump back and forth from clinical to academic medicine, but I think that once you decide you're not going to do postgraduate training or residency program, it is much harder to go back and retrain as a resident later on in your career. So, yeah.
I'd agree. Just get it, just get it done. If that's the way that you're thinking. As Dr. Cope said, I love, bringing in clinical pearls like, hey, I just had this at the urgent care last night. This relates to your cardiac pathophysiology here, and this is how. So I think it goes both ways, right? Your clinical practice can actually make you a better academic medicine physician, and being an academic medicine physician has definitely helped me having to review that physiology and pathophysiology again for lectures helps me when I'm looking at that respiratory distress case and I'm remembering the lecture that I just did that morning. I think that's really helpful to be able to bring to the table. So I think that's nice. And to answer another question that was on there is, does being an academic medicine take away from your clinical practice? I think having a foundation of clinical practice before you go into academic medicine can help cushion that. I don't know if I would be as good of a clinician if I hadn't have had a couple of years being a full-time clinician prior to academic medicine. That being said, if you're not seeing patients every single day or not your full time, you might not have the volume of things to recognize those interesting diagnoses that you would if you were doing full time. And I recognize that within myself. So that's why I always make sure to double check myself when I am doing clinical medicine and I have a diagnosis that I might be unsure about. Like, hey, I don't do this every day, so let me ask someone, and not hesitate to do that.
Yeah. For those who were like in the beginning part of the webinar, I had shared that I went into academic medicine right out of residency, but then decided to go back into more full-time clinical practice because I felt like I lacked that sort of rigorous clinical training, clinical practice after I had just trained. And a lot of people say the first 5 years after you come out of residency are really critical years in developing your foundation as a clinician. And so I would highly encourage you to pursue residency besides just the credibility, the credentialing, but just because you've already made it so far in being a physician that it's really good to kind of get all the way through postgraduate training.
Well, and sometimes, Dr. Lynn, we get questions like this from individuals who are maybe fearful that they may not match, right? And what is my backup? Understand that each of you have programs at your school, whether that's a career services department or they're called something else. Rely on those people. They're amazing people. Reach out to those people. You literally pay those people with your tuition. Sometimes you're afraid to reach out or you don't know who to reach out to. Please reach out to those people because they will help you through this process. They will be your lantern in the night. Their goal is for you to be successful and to match. So please reach out to those people. You all have those people. If you don't know who they are, get in touch with us and we will find them for you because they will be the people that will help you the most in any situation because they want you to be successful in all that you do.
Absolutely. So I think we tried to cover as much ground as we could today. And I want to thank everybody who joined us today in speaking a little bit about our own paths to academic medicine, hopefully giving you some ideas for you to be able to choose your journey wisely. The recording of this webinar will be posted on the AOGME webpage shortly. If you have any questions, please email aogme@aacom.org. That is aogme@acom.org. This concludes our session. Thank you again to everyone who joined us and have a great rest of your day. Thank you.